Hey, how's it going? With PoE 2 on the horizon, I've gone back into the archives to look at everything we know about the changes coming to skills and itemization, the core gameplay loop surrounding your character. With 2 months left until early access release, if you want to keep up to date on all the news releasing and what we know so far, subscribe to the channel for future videos. Let's jump straight into it with skills. Path of Exile has always had quite a unique skill system, and they're significantly changing how this functions in Path of Exile 2 by removing some of what made the system unique, but it's in an effort to further expand the absolutely ridiculous freedom it provides. In Path of Exile 2, your skill gems will no longer be tied to your items. No more spamming Jeweler's Orbs to land a 6 socket, spamming Fusings to get that 6 linked, and spamming Chromatics to get the right socket colors. Now, from the moment you wake up, you'll have 9 skill slots to make use of. Early on, you're unlikely to fill them quickly, but on your future ults, you'd be able to fill them all out instantly if you've stocked up on a supply of uncut gems. And each skill will be able to hold up to 5 supports. That's right, every single skill is a 6 link. Although when you first start out, you'll only have 2 slots available for support gems, and you'll be unlocking the rest over time with currencies. Initially, they had kept their colored socket system, and you would need to choose what color a socket was with a chromatic orb, but we saw in the Gamescom demo that this has been removed, which I think was the right choice here. Instead, you'll be limited on what colored support gems you can socket based on your current attributes. Increasing strength, dex, or intelligence then increases how many supports of that type you can socket. Strength, dex, and intelligence will also play a greater role in your total HP, accuracy rating, and mana regen, with travel nodes now being a selection of which attributes you want. It's much simpler to find the additional 10 dex without needing to reconfigure your whole passive tree for an item or skill requirement. Running ults is going to be insane. You'll have 6 link skills from the get-go with the right currencies, but you'll still need to get some levels into your attributes in order to socket them. And there is one significant change that is going to make builds more versatile. Support gems are now single use, meaning you cannot have multiple versions of the same support gems across multiple skills. In one of the 2023 ExileCon panels, the dev team discussed that skills in Path of Exile 1 became very restrictive, with the optimal builds generally utilizing a single skill as their main damage source, and then using every other skill to support this in other ways, usually with a focus on increasing damage. The item system also supported this, with builds only having 1 or 2 options to 6 link a gem, meaning all focus was on supporting the gem you could add the most to. Support gems then became about increasing damage, and while trying to bring this over to PoE 2, they were finding that every skill, like in Path of Exile 1, was being balanced around the support gems, which were simply damage additions, significantly limiting their ability to add utility to their skill system without it feeling toothless. To solve this, they've limited supports to a single use and made a number of other changes. All skill gems will likely function differently in Path of Exile 2 when compared to PoE 1 counterparts, but support skills in particular will be focused away from providing direct damage, and those that increase damage will now have drawbacks associated with them, so they're not simply a set and forget option. You'll need to weigh up how the drawbacks will impact your flow. Path of Exile 2 will be heavily focused on synergies between skills, rather than having a single nuke button like we see in Path of Exile 1. And the use system will enable them to increase the number of supports and give them interesting mechanics. By limiting support gems, players will naturally need to mix in multiple supports and explore different combinations instead of defaulting straight to what they consider their damage priority. In an interview with Gazzy TV and Darth Microtransaction, linked in the description, Jonathan stated that their goal is to have at least 9 viable support gem options, which will be recommended in the skills menu. These supports are considered good picks for each skill, and Jonathan went into some detail on his design focus for this. Being that there are 3 player archetypes they're trying to satisfy. The first being your DPS focused player who purely wants the biggest number. The second being players that want to explore a variety of synergies. They want to try new things and augment skills in interesting ways, but may not be the most efficient. And a third set of players just want to see something cool. They want it flashy, they want it to match the power fantasy they have in mind. Skill gems are no longer given to you as predetermined skills either. Instead, uncut gems will drop throughout and will also come as quest rewards or maybe hard-coded as boss drops. An uncut gem will drop with a level associated to it between 1 and 20. Certain skills will be locked behind this level requirement, with a high-level gem having the ability to cut into any skill gem in the game, while level 5 gems are only able to be cut into skills of that level or lower. As always with Path of Exile, any class can use any skill, and these drops will now provide players with an interesting choice of either selecting a new skill or upgrading an existing skill. So while skills may require a low-level gem to unlock initially, a level 20 gem can then be used to upgrade that skill to that level. I mentioned this in a recent video, so sorry to retread old ground, but I adore this change, especially through the campaign. These drops and building out your skills will be so much more engaging in Path of Exile 2, as you'll need to make these choices each time a gem drops. Which highlights the point. While any class can use any skill, attack skills in Path of Exile 2, which is skills that specifically are used by a weapon, will be tied to specific weapon types. Any class can use any weapon, so this remains quite broad for build variety, but it does mean you will need to closely consider what weapon type you want to use, as your skills will be tied to them. So let's dive more into that and look at changes to items as a whole. Weapons in Path of Exile 2 have been designed from the ground up to provide a greater variety of targeted options based on the weapon type and their primary attribute. This graphic was used as part of the 2023 ExileCon discussion on the topic, with items, including weapons, falling into these categories, with the purpose being to aid players in reaching the goal of their build. For weapons, this is expanded out into giving them very unique implicit modifiers, which are stats on an item that are specific to that item type. Maces, for example, are generally going to have the advantage at destroying enemy armor. Daggers with critical hit chance, and quarterstaffs will increase your attack skill range. I do love this concept. I wish it could be extended further to all skill types, as that would have been an insane increase to build theory crafting by mixing and matching these implicits. Wands and staffs are being handled very differently, often dropping with an actual skill associated with them, like Fireball or the ability to buff the use of your next skill gem ability for spellcasters. These skills attached to items won't have mana costs. For trappers and miners, we've also seen items like the proximity mine or manually detonated mine, which can be thrown onto the ground to create traps for enemies prior to engaging them, or in the heat of combat. It's been discussed that traps and mines have been largely unified. There is a base type and you choose whether the skill is a trap or mine, from there augmenting its style. Now I'll admit, I've never really delved into mine builds in Path of Exile, but with the ability to swap between sets in Path of Exile 2, this could be much more interesting for players like me. Path of Exile 2 will benefit greatly from swapping between weapon sets, especially with their focus on skills being tied to weapons, and one key point to highlight, you won't need to click a button to manually swap between weapon sets. Using a skill with set 1 will swap for you. If you then use a skill that is tied to your second set, your character will swap again, and all you need to do is cast. I could see a bow user having their second set as mines or traps or some type, and then swapping between the two to lay down fields of mines before whipping out the bow and taking aim at monsters. Or being a barbarian type character with a giant axe to cleave through the chaff, and a mace and shield to take on armored foes. With the dual weapon sets, we'll also be able to specialize our skill tree to take advantage of this, being able to swap passive skill distributions when you swap weapons, ensuring that your axe specializations aren't going to waste when you mix in another weapon and their relevant abilities. When it comes to your other items like armor and jewelry, we're likely to see a very similar system to Path of Exile 1, minus the sockets associated with the skill gems, which are now gone. But that's not to say nothing is changing. Items have been entirely redesigned as a concept, with the developers wanting to move away from explosions of rare items that in the endgame fit no real purpose. For those seasoned Path of Exile 1 players, you'll know what I'm talking about. You kill a bunch of mobs and a boss, 15 rares will drop, and most of the time, you'll walk right by them without even thinking about it. Rare items in Path of Exile's endgame are a bit of a mess, with most rares needing to be rolled perfectly to be worth anything at all, and taking the time to investigate each rare is often time wasted, and impacts on the way players think about loot drops. In Path of Exile 2, they've made a ton of changes to item design, which I won't focus on for too long. Link in the description if you're interested in hearing about their visual design process, which is going to have greater consistency and style. I will say they look incredibly gorgeous once rendered, and while some of the dev team aren't the best public speakers, I did find their approach interesting and worth a listen. But the info you're likely more interested in is that rare drops in Path of Exile 2 will come in tiers, from your normal rare drop through a tiered system up to tier 5 drops, which will be visible while the item is on the ground, allowing you to quickly glance over what's dropped and make more informed choices. They've made sweeping changes to item quantity and rarity stats as part of their redesign, and players will find that there are very few ways to increase item quantity, which isn't a bad thing. Magic Find is still in the game, but there is a greater focus on rarity, getting you less loot overall when compared to Path of Exile 1, but having the drops be more impactful, and increasing in value with bosses now being a viable way to farm higher tier currencies, which isn't the case in current Path of Exile. And as a side note, we still have the same philosophy when it comes to unique items in Path of Exile 2. Uniques will be designed to meet a specific purpose or build, rather than be a top tier item used by everyone. And yes, we'll see many uniques return from Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2, but we might find them slightly changed to meet the host of gameplay changes. With this new system on items has come a change to currency. Orbs of Alteration and Scouring no longer exist. Chaos Orbs no longer reroll rare items entirely. The Path of Exile 2 devs identified that the purpose of Chaos Orbs in Path of Exile didn't meet the initial plan. They were rarely used to any specific effect on items, as it rerolled the entire thing, and this meant that if an item dropped and it had one or two bad modifiers, it was often discarded as a near miss, with few opportunities to attempt to craft the item into a better state. In Path of Exile 2, Chaos Orbs will now swap out a single stat on the item, which sounds like it might function a little like an Annulment Orb, except instead of simply removing the stat, it will re-roll it into something completely different. This will absolutely increase the value of those rare items that drop with 1 or 2 bad stats, and allow players an opportunity to try and get lucky by Chaos Orbing it, in the hopes it'll capture that bad stat and roll it into something better. While this is still RNG focused and likely to hit the wrong stat more often than not, it will make those near miss items worth collecting, either for yourself or to trade. We also know that flasks are changing quite a bit in Path of Exile 2. Utility flasks are now a more reactive item, similar to how Path of Exile 1 players spec out their endgame flasks to have mods that remove ignite or freeze. This is the focus in Path of Exile 2, having flasks that suit a specific purpose rather than generally increasing stats like evasion or armor, and to move players, like myself, away from pianoing their flaskies. Which brings me to one of the greater quality of life changes we've heard of. You'll be able to see how an item is going to impact your current character stats by holding shift and comparing it to your current items. And I don't mean what they have currently being a direct comparison, the game will do the math for you, showing you the DPS, armor, and evasion changes so you can make a faster, informed decision on items. I really love their approach to skills and items in Path of Exile 2. I have some reservations around how skills will combo. Will it feel like I'm needing to do way too much to kill certain enemies? Or will the system feel satisfying enough that I don't notice? Given grinding a game's success, I am willing to give them the benefit of the doubt until I can try it for myself. What do you think of these skill and item changes? If I had to pick one, the Uncut Gem system I think is one of the biggest improvements that Path of Exile 2 will bring, just to the feel of the game. But tell me what you're excited for in the comments below. As always, if you want to help me in the channel, the best way to do it is with a like and by subscribing to keep up to date. But you being here, that's already enough. Come hang out in my streams Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 PM Australian Eastern Standard Time, right here on YouTube and on Twitch. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.